I am Steve Adams. I'm with the Institute for Sustainable Communities, and it's our pleasure to host this webinar on the Southeast Florida Regional Climate Change Compact. This is a webinar for the Sustainable Communities Learning Network of HUD grantees, and we're delighted to welcome many participants from around the country and even some participants from Southeast Florida within this specific region here that we're talking of today to learn more about this interesting case. Joining me today are three distinguished panelists who have played a pivotal role in helping to form and advance the Regional Climate Change Compact in Southeast Florida. Joining me will be Nicole Hefty, who serves as the Sustainability Chief in Miami-Dade County, Jason Lepty, who is the Policy Coordinator for Broward County and for the broader Compact, and Jennifer Jurado, who is the Director of the Division of Environmental Resources and Community Resilience for Broward County. My panelists in a moment will give you greater detail about the particulars of the Regional Climate Change Compact, but before I turn this over, I want very much to set just a bit of a context to help us really locate the compact within the broader field of practice. Certainly in the last several years, we have seen an increase in the interest in climate change adaptation at the local government level. It's really ticked up very significantly within the last 5 years, and I think this can be explained in large measure by the number of extreme weather events that we've seen that become increasingly common. Everything ranging from drought in the west to Superstorm Sandy in the east. These issues are happening with greater frequency, and local governments are being called increasingly to respond to these issues. Just as we've seen an increase in local government attention to these issues, we've seen also a federal and parallel state increase in activities as well. And I think it's probably important and helpful to put this experience into a broader kind of policy context. I think certainly climate change adaptation policy in the United States really dates back to the early days of the Obama administration, in which many federal agencies began serious work in trying to think about what the federal role would be in addressing climate change adaptation nationwide. Early in the current administration, several of the agencies convened an interagency task force chaired by CEQ. They made their final reports back to the President, their final recommendations in October of 2010. And you will see the policy goals and recommendations here really kind of stipulate that the federal role was going to be one of taking ownership of federal resources. So the feds would, in fact, take lead on assessing vulnerabilities and developing adaptation strategies for military installations, national forests, national parks, but otherwise work to provide decision support tools, science, technical assistance to the private sector and to state and local governments. But the recommendations here, I think, really call out the challenge in climate change adaptation. Because the impacts of climate change vary from location to location around the country, and because there is a need to coordinate federal, state, and local responses in a very seamless fashion, this really does create a very challenging perspective from the federal role. And then if the feds are in fact primarily charged with providing science, technical assistance, and tools to local governments and to state governments, you very rapidly run into a scaling problem. There's 50 states, there's over 3,000 counties in the United States, and there's more than 19,500 municipalities. So obviously, one-on-one engagement with every municipality is going to just not be possible for federal agencies seeking to provide decision support and other kinds of technical assistance. So perhaps there is some way in terms of finding efficiencies in aggregating local governments at perhaps a metro-regional scale that enables a more efficient engagement for federal and state actors, and particularly those trying to provide technical assistance, and really focusing on how to aggregate local government attention around these regions because they're facing similar impacts, firstly, and secondly, they need to often coordinate adaptation responses because municipalities often are adjoining in a larger metro area, and so the decisions taken by one municipality on adaptation can severely impact its neighbors if in fact it's not well coordinated. So we see increasingly activity within the local government context happening at various levels of scale. So we're seeing adaptation assessment and strategy development and implementation happening at the individual agency level, the Department of Public Works within a particular city. We're seeing cities who are thinking about adaptation in terms of how climate will impact their provision of municipal services. We're seeing most commonly individual jurisdictional plans, a plan for a given city or a given county. But now we're seeing, as in the case in South Florida, and we're seeing it in other places around the country as well, a desire to create these metro-regional collaboratives that enable an efficient access to federal and state technical assistance resources, an aggregation of effort, and a coordination of policy development and strategy implementation that we think is a new and perhaps necessary ingredient to really ensuring that adaptation is successful across the United States. So this brings us to the case of the Southeast Florida Regional Climate Change Compact. The compact itself is an interlocal agreement amongst 4 counties: Palm Beach, Broward, Miami-Dade, and Monroe. This is a geographically significant county within the state. It accounts for about a third of the state's population, as well as a third of the state's total economy, just within these 4 counties. There's 108 municipalities here, and there's a long history of work that had been taken by individual municipalities and counties prior to the formation of the regional compact. Miami-Dade County has had emission reductions plans in place and being implemented since the early 90s. And 3 of the 4 counties, in fact, had county-level climate change adaptation plans in place before the formation of the compact. So I understand that Nicole Hefty, who is our next presenter, is having technical difficulties, so I'll just jump in here quickly to perhaps cover a couple of her points while we get her back online. So early on in the process, I think it's important to recognize the fact that the region of Southeast Florida has many attributes that naturally tie them together. It's a linear strip with the Atlantic on the eastern border and the Everglades to the west. This is an area that does not have a lot of topography. There is a bit of a coastal ridge on which most of the urban area is built, north to south, but the underlying geology is one of porous lime rock, and the impact of sea level rise and the freshwater aquifers there on the landward side are things that are being experienced across the region. There is a very heavily integrated regional economy with a tourism and trade basis, and certainly the regional transportation network itself ensures that people travel frequently on a daily basis from one county to the next and going from home to work. So in finding commonalities across the region enabled this region, I think, to really fully recognize that they had common interests in working together. The Southeast Florida Regional Climate Compact, as noted, is really an interlocal agreement. It was initiated at a regional summit held by the 4 counties in late 2009. By early 2010, all 4 county commissions had in fact ratified the compact by ordinance or by resolution. And it had 4 specific commitments that the counties were making. Specifically, they indicated that they would coordinate on their federal and state policy advocacy on energy and climate change issues. They agreed to work together to develop a suite of analytical tools that would then support the creation of a regional climate action plan that would focus both on emission reduction opportunities, climate mitigation, as well as climate adaptation and building resilience. And finally, the compact parties agreed that they would meet annually in a regional summit to mark progress. In forming the compact, the real organizational structure has really focused on a day-to-day management component of the compact staff steering committee. These are senior staff members, of which our three panelists are all voting members, and they serve to manage the day-to-day business. And you'll see in this schematic an early set of working groups who were formed to help meet the specific needs of the compact itself.
One of the major first milestones was the creation of a unified sea level rise projection from Southeast Florida. Prior to the compact, each of the individual counties had developed different projections, relative sea level rise projections. Each were using local scientists to help them develop that. Many of whom are very widely regarded in international circles as well, published in IPCC and have made major contributions to the National Climate Assessment. But their processes happened at different times and using different tranches of scientific peer-reviewed literature and arrived at slightly different projections. And another plot, which we're not showing here, actually shows the different projections on a single slide. And the lack of consistency on these projections was problematic, just from the ability from an advocacy perspective, because many members of Congress or many state house districts actually cross jurisdictional boundaries. And so there was, just in terms of communicating the risk and the planning assumptions, we had different. So a major first achievement was to reconvene many of the participants at the individual county level and arrive at a unified sea level rise projection, which now is being used across the region in many different planning tools, design tools, processes at the county level and in many cases at the city level as well. So the first kind of commitment of the compact was really delivered by production of these three documents: the sea level rise projection, a regional vulnerability assessment that was conducted regionally by county staff all the way down to the parcel level that was done consistently across the 4 counties, and then a regional greenhouse gas inventory. Those,
can you hear me?
I can hear you.
Yay. You've been doing a wonderful job, I have to say.
Well, thank you, and I'm quite happy to turn it over to you.
Thank you so much. My apologies, everyone. No idea what was happening there. So to pick up where Steve left off, with the Regional Climate Action Plan, using those technical documents that we developed that were so critical in informing the planning process, we pulled together stakeholders and technical experts from the region over a year through 3 work groups and developed over 100 recommendations for both adaptation and mitigation for the region. And we organized the plan in these 6 sectors you see here. And the 2 things I really want to focus on is the fact that one of the primary goals was to integrate both climate adaptation and mitigation into existing systems and programs rather than trying to create a whole new process. And in addition, although the 4 counties have been working very closely together as a region, we also recognize that we're all a little bit different with regards to politics and resources. And so the plan was developed as a framework to allow us to move together forward as a region and really tackling some of these broader regional issues that enable us to have the flexibility to do things a little bit differently if needed at the county level. Next slide, please. So over the next 2 slides, there's a lot of information, a lot of examples, and I don't have time to go into those examples. Jennifer and Jason will be covering some of these in a little more detail, and we have a lot of information on the compact website, so I encourage you to please go to the website afterwards and get more information. But I want to just mention in a broader scale that we really have been very successful in engaging state, federal, and international support on the work that we've been doing here at the region. And that has brought in tremendous resources that we really didn't have when we were working individually at the county and municipal level. And that has really allowed us to make tremendous additional progress that I can say from my past experience we wouldn't have experienced if we had continued to work individually. Our first efforts to, back to the former slide please, our first efforts to get funding weren't successful, but I'm happy to say that we have been able to attract quite a bit of funding on various projects and really looking at how to inform our process and working on these different processes and again, or these projects, and again being able to provide the pilots and the case studies for others to take advantage of. Next slide, please. And one thing I do want to mention that was so critical is thanks to Steve and the Institute for Sustainable Communities, we were able to get a $975,000 grant from the Kresge Foundation specifically to facilitate implementation of the Regional Climate Action Plan over a period of 3 years. So that has really been a tremendous resource for us. As I mentioned, priority with the RCAP was to integrate these considerations into existing programs. We have some really good examples of that ongoing right now. We've also been successful in influencing state and federal policy, and Jason and Jennifer are going to give you some detailed examples of that. And we've also received several awards. As many of you know, elected officials like to be able to brag about things, and so this has been very helpful in continuing the support that we have at the upper levels for the work that we're doing, and again, continuing to draw additional resources into our region to further our progress. Next slide, please. And so just to kind of wrap it up and taking the example that Steve mentioned earlier and really showing you how well it's working, I've had the advantage as we were developing our countywide sustainability plan green print. Being a staff steering committee of the compact, I was very connected to what was going on at the regional level. So I was able to take that broader work and understand how it would support what I'm doing at the local level, and then tailor some of the different strategies and initiatives within our county plan to, again, take advantage of that, but then support that broader regional work. And then, as Steve mentioned, I believe earlier, this work at the 4-county level was very instrumental in getting the funding for the 750 project, which was then a 7-county collaborative. So again, really aligning the priorities and the strategies really supports, kind of cross-connecting, going up and down and supporting the different levels of effort that really have allowed us to make the progress that we've made. And again, garnering the technical and financial support of a broad array of state, federal, and not-for-profit organizations has really been, I think, very instrumental in our success so far. And with that, I'm going to turn it over to the next presenter.
Okay, thank you so much, Nicole. I'm delighted you were able to join. You're so much more articulate than I am. Turning now to Jason Fleckney with Broward County to talk about compact policy and resource coordination.
Thank you, Steve. I hope everyone can hear me. I'm glad Nicole was able to join. In addition to my sort of full-time day job as environmental projects coordinator here with Broward, I also serve essentially a sort of de facto role as the compact's policy and legislative coordinator, which is a tremendous honor because in many ways policy coordination is at the core of the compact. In fact, the document that was signed, which is actually technically is what the compact is, I think 4 of the 7 clauses actually pertain to policy coordination. So it's from the beginning been a really important part of our work, collective work together. Speaking a little bit more broadly, but not just about the policy, but also some resource coordination, there are kind of 4 general areas I want to discuss, and they'll kind of break out some of those a little bit further as I go along. Federal and state legislative advocacy, which involves creation of annual legislative programs laying out compact joint priorities by all 4 counties at both the state and federal level. And I won't get into the details. We can certainly provide you with those documents, but as you might expect, there's strong support for clean energy, energy efficiency, smart growth, greenhouse gas emissions reductions, and similar policies. We've also come and developed a good working relationship in terms of how we pursue and work through external funding opportunities. We're also very interested in coordinating with our municipalities throughout the region. And then in a different way, we're also very committed to sharing information about things that we're doing within our own counties and helping each other to replicate some of the initiatives that we are engaged in. Next slide, please. So I'm not going to go into the whole process. There's a lot of words on this slide about how we go about our annual legislative program development, but essentially there is a process. We go through it annually. There's a policy team which consists of representatives from the 4 counties, and generally speaking, the legislative programs are actually an agreement among the 4 counties. Our municipal members on the steering committee are invited to support those, but we don't sort of mandate it. But in any event, we have a process where we review the previous year's program. We look to see what might be amended or changed and what needs to be added or removed, and then they always go to each of the 4 county commissions for approval, so that there's a common program that all 4 counties have officially agreed to. Next slide, please. So just a couple highlights of some of the federal advocacy that the compact partners have engaged in. Soon after the compact was signed, maybe 6 months later, or a couple months I guess after, I think it was May is when the Deepwater Horizon oil spill occurred, and very quickly the compact partners put together a press conference and a statement of priorities, which focused again largely on clean energy and climate change policy. This was at the time when Congress seemed that it might actually approve some bills related to carbon pollution, and that came together very quickly and garnered press. Another example was a joint letter that was issued in response to a call put out by the Bicameral Task Force on Climate Change on Capitol Hill, again laying out some of the lessons that were learned from our work together and some of the priorities that we had. That was in April 2013. And though there haven't been as many of these recently, there have been some joint Capitol Hill visits on the part of the 4 counties and other partners. Moving to the state, the most significant achievement of the compact to date occurred during the 2011 session of the Florida Legislature, and that was the creation of a tool called Adaptation Action Areas. I'll get into that a little bit more in a minute. And then we are trying to make sure that our voice is heard in Tallahassee. In many ways, the state has not been terribly engaged on climate change or sea level rise issues. And so we have looked for ways to engage our legislators, and the most significant event within the last 2 years was a meeting of the 3 county legislative delegations from Miami-Dade County, which actually includes Monroe County as well, Broward County and Palm Beach County, up in Tallahassee. Jennifer and others were up there for this hearing, and finally got a chance to speak to legislators about the challenges we face here in South Florida. And we've looked for ways to continue that momentum, and hopefully we'll have another opportunity to address a similar group in the future. Next slide. So yeah, now just a little bit more about the adaptation action areas. As I said, they were added during the 2011 session through amendments to the Community Planning Act. It's notable that this tool was created. It was actually taking place at the same time that much of the state's existing growth management legislation was being quite sharply cut back. And so I'm still not convinced exactly how this all happened. I joked that it was witchcraft. But in any event, this really positive tool was passed into law. There's a statutory reference there. I won't bore everyone by reading it. And what essentially adaptation action areas are, they're an optional comprehensive plan designation for areas that either experience coastal flooding or are somehow otherwise vulnerable to the impacts of rising sea levels. And the purpose of this tool is to be able to prioritize these areas for funding for infrastructure and adaptation planning measures. Soon after this was passed, there was an opportunity that came down from NOAA through the state's Department of Economic Opportunity to support a pilot program to actually see how this would be implemented at the local level. And it ended up being a partnership among Fort Lauderdale, the city of Fort Lauderdale, Broward County, and the South Florida Regional Planning Council. And Fort Lauderdale, of course, was the sort of municipal case study. And as a result of this work and discussion, a series of guidance documents were developed that could be shared statewide for other communities that were looking at using this tool. And the ultimate goal of this was that Fort Lauderdale itself would incorporate adaptation action areas into its own comprehensive plan language so that it could then implement them or designate areas. And it has done that. It has incorporated it into its comp plan, and as my understanding is actually looking at some areas in which could be designated, and then this tool could be further developed and used. Next slide, please. So turning to the external funding opportunities point that I mentioned earlier in the introduction, what's developed is that our partners, we and our partners, have all decided that we want to support each other by basically supporting the best positioned entity for a particular grant opportunity rather than resorting to this sort of traditional cutthroat competition of every man or woman for him or herself. And it wasn't always like this. This relationship or this approach to these types of opportunities developed as a result of years of successful collaboration working with each other and the bonds of trust that developed from that working relationship. Next slide, please. And so there's a few examples of where this has this approach has worked well, and others where it wasn't as practical. So I mentioned the NOAA grant. Again, that was sort of an opportunity that came down through NOAA and the state, but it was it was supported by all of the other partners. It wasn't there wasn't envy on the part of the other communities that were either active in the compact but weren't picked. It was seen quite widely that Fort Lauderdale was very well positioned, Broward County and the Regional Planning Council were very well positioned to move forward with this pilot, and so there was a great deal of support from the other partners. Probably the best example of where we made a mutual decision on which of our partners would apply for something was something called the Reinvest Initiative, which is looking at how public-private partnerships might help to fund adaptive infrastructure. After looking at the opportunity, it seemed to fit quite nicely with the work that Miami Beach had been doing on its stormwater system and upgrades to that system. And so a decision was made through the staff steering committee that Miami Beach would be the applicant and that the compact would support that application. And fortunately, Miami Beach was one of, I think, 8 communities nationwide that was chosen. And after about a year and a half of this initiative, a work product was recently, I think, released. I'm not sure if it was for final release. I haven't had a chance to take a look at it yet, but it was. It is going to be shared, and so the outcome is basically that everyone will benefit from Miami Beach's participation in this through that document and the lessons it is learned. Similarly, there is a Federal Highway Administration grant looking at vulnerability assessment of transportation infrastructure. It's being led by the Broward MPO. That seemed to be the best positioned entity to lead it, but there's participation from many of the other MPOs and other entities, municipalities, counties in Southeast Florida. An example of where this didn't quite work, where we couldn't agree on a single candidate for an application, was the 100 Resilient Cities Challenge. I think it was about a year and a half ago from the Rockefeller Foundation. And because there were quite a few communities who were interested, and we didn't want to play favorites, and there wasn't a clear case of someone who was best positioned for this. What the compact staff steering committee decided to do was offer letters of support to anyone who requested it, and with the the understanding that whatever knowledge was developed through that through a winning application would be shared with the whole region. Unfortunately, none of our cities have been chosen for that yet. I think there may be one more round to that competition. But that was the approach taken there. And then slightly differently, we were recently chosen by the Department of Energy as a region to be one of 16 climate action champion communities in the country. And this was a joint application. It's more or less a technical assistance program. Unfortunately, there wasn't much cash award, none actually. But what it might do is actually help position us for actual federal funding, potentially in a preferential way. This was something that was one of our counties took the lead on submitting the application, but on behalf of the entire compact, and we're quite we're quite sincere about wanting to make sure that this is a joint effort, that any resources or technical assistance that comes down from the federal level is available and shared and guided mutually by all of the 4 compact counties and, of course, our municipal partners and others. And what we're excited about is that we haven't really before settled on a numeric goal for greenhouse gas emissions reductions, and that was part of the application process that we needed to set a goal as a region. And so the goal is 2% annually, and I think that will help focus our efforts as these technical assistance and potentially funding comes down. We now have a benchmark against which to measure our progress. Next slide, please. So just talking a little bit about municipal coordination, as Steve and Nicole mentioned, initially the compact was led by the 4 counties, but it soon became evident that since so much policy and so much infrastructure and so many decisions are made at the municipal level, we really needed to find a way to incorporate municipal participation into the compact activities. And so there are municipal members on our staff steering committee now, but of course that's 1 per county, and there are 109 municipalities in the 4 counties, so obviously that leaves out 105 if we were to just talk to those 4. So we're always looking for new opportunities to engage our municipalities here in the region. One method that we pursued a couple of years ago, and which is still ongoing, was the Mayor's Climate Action Pledge. This was a means for municipalities to essentially adopt a resolution of support for the compact, which also contained some language, non-committal, but basically pledging to take a look at integrating regional climate action plan framework recommendations into those municipalities' own future plans, sustainability plans, climate plans, capital plans, et cetera. And then, of course, there was a clause that urged other municipalities to adopt the pledge themselves. We were hoping this would kind of cause a snowball effect. So I believe we have, I think, it's around 25 or 30 municipalities in the region that have adopted the pledge, and it is ongoing. Others are invited to do that. And another way of engaging municipalities, which has been very successful, is through the implementation workshops that ISC, as a result of the Kresge Foundation funding, has been coordinating for the region on a variety of different topics. Everything from integrating climate into water supply planning to stormwater management to climate communications. There's been an effort to invite municipalities, particularly technical folks, from utilities, depending on the issue, what it might be, transportation agencies, et cetera, to engage, because this is really where the rubber meets the road. Is we have these policies, well, how do we implement it? And since so much of that implementation, as I said, will be done by municipalities, we really want to engage them. And finally, a more recent development is the development of a municipal working group, and this is a formal mechanism for involving more municipalities in the compact process. It's still being worked out, and it's being led by the 4 municipal members of the staff steering committee. Next slide. And then just to close, I sort of mentioned that we have this great process for sharing things that we're working on together. And so we've collaborated on annual reports about the compact. We share press release language on common on issues that we're working on in common, so that everyone can put that out. As I mentioned, the products of grants and programs that are specific to a county or city are shared with the group and the whole region. I think Nicole mentioned that climate change policies have been incorporated in all 4 counties' comprehensive and land use plans to some extent, and there was a lot of mutual learning and exchange around that. And similarly, as property assessed clean energy programs have been rolled out across the region, we've really learned from each other and shared information about that to help each other develop really good programs. So with that, I'll close and move on to Jennifer.
Okay, Jason, thank you so much. Jennifer is going to kind of distill some of the major lessons learned from the compact. Jennifer Jurado.
All right, thanks very much, Steve. I think that everyone's provided a real nice kind of foundation and framing for the work that's taken place over the last several years here in Southeast Florida. I just wanted to provide a few maybe specific examples of where we've really been able to propel our regional and local planning processes and some of the investments that are supporting decision making by virtue of working in such a collaborative manner. As some of the other panelists have referenced, we have seen quite an acceleration But I think it's really remarkable to think that in the few years that we've been working together, all 4 of the counties have formally integrated climate change into our comprehensive plans. Now, some of us might have actually structured a climate element. Others maybe took the effort of initially looking how to integrate climate change across the various elements, but the fact is that it has been populated there. We have all agreed to utilize the unified sea level rise projection as a basis for the planning purposes. And again, as already expressed, it's not only being utilized by the counties, but it's being embedded in all of these processes, whether it's the transportation grant, whether it was the water supply workshop that was part of the implementation series. It's been referenced well beyond the 4-county area in many national planning documents as, again, a model of how regions have been able to collect the science, package it in a way that's now serving in a support role for planning purposes. So those are just really remarkable, I think, advancements that individually might have been harder to move forward, but when you had the momentum of all of these other local governments and initiatives gaining this traction, it made it very easy to begin to piggyback on those. Another example of how we've accelerated planning is through these transferable models, and really what that's about is not having to duplicate or have such redundancy in process. And we appreciate the fact that one of our partners, like Miami-Dade, has had really great transportation experts in their staff. And maybe in Broward County, our focus or some of our talent has been more in the area of water resources. And in Monroe County and in Palm Beach County, they've had really strong natural resources groups. And so any one of our initiatives, we've really been able to draw upon the competency of our partners. We haven't had to duplicate all of that expertise within our individual initiatives, but we've been able to take collective advantage of all of the bright individuals and talent that are represented across our region. And in one way that's really been, I think, impactful, one example is resilient redesign, when we hosted a 4-county workshop that was designed to think creatively about how we can begin to embed resiliency planning within our development and redevelopment processes. And we had this whole community that organized support among that on that particular project, and we identified 3 representative sorts of landscapes that, 1, were able to benefit from that regional talent, but then 2, those landscapes were already representative of similar landscapes elsewhere in the community. So there was this great transfer of knowledge that took place. Another area of kind of sharing and leveraging of resources has been our shared investments in hydrologic models, and these are very advanced hydrologic models that allow us to integrate sea level rise and climate change scenarios. And Miami-Dade's made a very sizable investment, so has Broward County. We're both working with the same federal partner, the USGS, and so we have common boundary conditions. We're able to learn from the advancements from the Miami-Dade project that looks a little bit different from ours, but it's the same sort of tooling, and then begin to improve the approach or enhance the next phase of our project based upon some of the shared lessons that are emerging from those processes. So those are 2, I think, really good examples. And maybe I would just note that we also, in Broward County, we host a sustainability stewards network, and there's I think they're quarterly or bi-monthly convenings on topical areas. While that's a kind of a Broward-sponsored and staffed initiative, that is open to our partners across the 4-county area, and any one convening, we have diverse representation from well beyond Broward. Next slide, please. And another, I think, example, too, of where we've been able to accelerate planning and bring very focused technical resources to a challenge, the challenge du jour has been in these highlighted areas here. We recognize that shoreline resilience was a very important focal area. We wanted to think more not about how we elevate structures and armoring, but how we really incentivize and celebrate green infrastructure as part of our planning strategy. And again, here both the Monroe County, the Keys, and Palm Beach have been tremendous partners. The Nature Conservancy came in to serve as an organizer, and Broward County provided technical expertise as it related to some of the GIS tooling. And as a result of working on this effort for about the last year, we've got these tremendous work products that the Nature Conservancy has brought together. We just delivered yesterday this online GIS tool, and Broward County has already used this tool twice in kind of thinking about how we compare to our neighbors. Maybe we increase our goals with respect to the prevalence of green infrastructure in our shoreline, and we've had those internal conversations. And also now we can prioritize as we're talking with our cities about, well, what types of opportunities do we have? Where are the priority reaches? Where should we be focusing our investments? And we're helping to inform those decisions, and also organizing a grant program that will support our local governments in terms of implementing some of the preferred strategies. So great regional effort with very specific local applications. We're also taking that collective capacity from our experts who supported our sea level rise work group the first time. We're now in the final stages of the second reconvening, where we're bringing together the science from the latest National Climate Assessment and the peer-reviewed literature from the fifth IPCC report, and we will be unveiling our updated sea level rise projection with a longer time horizon and perhaps some adjustments in the projections because of what we've been able to collectively learn in the last several years since the first projection was solidified. And then the last area that I think is going to really serve our region as well is with respect to climate indicators. And our goal here is to create a portal where you don't have to go to the National Climate Assessment or pore over academic documents, but anybody in our region who's wanting to really get a quick education on what does climate change look like in our backyard, we'll have a portal on the compact website that says these are your top 15, it's actually more like 12, but indicators. This is how climate change is shaping or influencing or being measured right here in Southeast Florida. So it'll be a great communication tool, but it'll also serve as a kind of a central data portal, providing the right resources for individuals who are looking to integrate this science into their planning processes and decision making. The compact has also served to or aided in the advancement of some other very large-scale projects that I think, had we not had this foundation of regional support and collective participation around climate issues, we would have really been challenged with some of the other very important but very relevant projects for our region. And one area of tremendous advancement has been a two-county, multi-city effort to advance a regional water supply project, and we were able to relate the necessary and collective investment in a regional surface water reservoir back to the priorities that are identified in the Climate Compact document itself, and so many of the pressures of climate change. And this is now a project during the last several years we've been able to develop a lot of the design and costing that has prepared us to move forward with the construction of this project. And we've had some very significant policy discussions, funding requests that have been advanced through the state to help get this project off the ground. So another good model. I think that we've probably talked enough about the integration of climate and planning that I can probably go ahead and skip this slide, but what I will just note is that the concept of adaptation action areas is something that's really taking root, and it's not just the city of Fort Lauderdale. Broward County is now moving forward with a very specific designation of a planning area. We are now working to integrate into our land use plan a means for recognizing adaptation action areas of regional consequence. That language is going through the workshop process just now and has been coordinated at the state level. And we've also have cities that aren't the formal representatives of the municipal partners in the compact that have also talked about their forward movement with the adaptation action area language as well. So it's got much broader reach. I've talked about resilient redesign, so I'm just going to go ahead and I think skip that slide. And here, the point of this particular slide is to really talk about how we have made a very concerted effort to think about how we can expand the benefits of the compact well beyond the compact partners or those who are most directly engaged. Our goal really is here to have all of our communities, all of our agency partners from the four-county area to really feel ownership of the compact and to utilize all of the compact resources to their greatest advantage. We were very pleased to host our first webinar just a month or so ago. I think we had nearly 400 registrants, the focus being the importance of regional models, how we can work with communities across our state to help advance climate resiliency and make sure it's not just South Florida that's very, prominent in those conversations, but that collectively we're bringing the resources back to our local governments that'll aid our respective efforts. We've also really, so the next slide, in the compact conversation, we've had the privilege of being able to have some national conversation. We were able to have direct participation in the Presidential Task Force on Climate Resilience and Preparedness. The compact efforts are highlighted there, but more important, I think, is that we were able to influence some of the recommendations in a manner that is now coming back to benefit local governments. And one example I will give is we had a strong voice in the recommendations relating to the Built Systems Work Group and coastal resilience in particular. And being able to refer back to this document and some of the priority strategies that are detailed here have gone a long way to helping our communications with a very significant federal agency partner whose joint partnership is going to be critical to our shoreline resiliency strategy. So we're really utilizing that document to our advantage today. And in the next slide, one other, I think, challenge of our region has been historically overcoming some of the negative communications. And I think that with the participation of our partner governments in the compact, we've really been able to ensure that we're celebrating the positive aspects of regional collaboration and being proactive and taking a progressive stance on climate initiatives and issues. And as a result, I feel that there's been a real turn in the type of coverage that the region receives, and it's one of celebration for how policies and planning are aligned to support our local planning efforts and will benefit our communities. And in moving forward, some of the priorities we've established for ourselves are detailed here in some of the focal areas for compact implementation workshops this next year. We will also receive the benefit of Monroe County's hosting what is our sixth annual climate summit, and well, maybe it's our seventh, held in the Keys this year. And in this next slide, one of the areas that we're going to be moving in this next year as well is giving a little bit of a reconsideration to the compact structure. We're wanting to formalize things in a way in which we might be a little bit more competitive for some of the regional funding. We're also looking to formalize, not just with the municipal work group, but also municipal membership in the compact, hopefully adding to that sense of ownership and RCAP implementation. And we're also in the final phases of formalizing a partnership agreement with our academic partners as part of the Florida Climate Initiative, and hoping to bring a better partnering in academic research in a way that focuses on very specific planning needs and research needs of the compact partners. So with that, I'll conclude, and thanks for the opportunity to participate.
Jennifer, I'm grateful, and I'm grateful to Jason and Nicole as well. There's a lot of information, and this case is so rich with so much to share. It's tough to kind of squeeze this into a 1-hour webinar, but you've done a great job. I'm going to, just in the interest of time, I want to leave just a few minutes for questions with the time, but and we will be sharing this. This is being recorded, and folks can access this after the fact, and then we will make the slides available through the SCLN process as well. But certainly we see, I think, some major benefits for regional collaboration. This is a region that really understood and appreciated the commonalities against which they then were able to construct a very vibrant regional process. They have garnered political support to move things forward, and they've certainly garnered a great deal in the way of resources to help them advance. So we see this as one of the most remarkable cases of regional collaboration, and we at ISC really give a huge tip of the hat to Jennifer, Jason, and Nicole and their colleagues in South Florida who have really advanced this process. So Henry McKay, my colleague at ISC, who is manning the control booth here, I think we are ready for questions.
Okay, we have a few questions in that people have submitted through the question box. Hopefully we'll have time to get through them all. You are able to still submit more if you like through that question box. You can just type them in. So the first one we have is from Michael Gove. He's asking, isn't the term climate change unlawful in Florida now?
Steve from ISC here, I will ask any of my panelists to jump in on that one.
Well, this is Jennifer. I think probably many saw the article over the weekend, and whatever has been the preferred terminology for some of our state agency partners at the local level, we have been successful in being able to talk about climate change quite freely.
Yeah, so in Southeast Florida, it really has not been so much of an issue as certainly the coverage over the weekend noted at the state level.
And Steve, this is Jason. If I could just add, one of the remarkable features, I think, and one of the things that really makes the compact stand out is that it was initially a bipartisan initiative and has continued to be supported on a bipartisan basis by municipal and county elected officials from both Republicans and Democrats and nonpartisan elected officials, and I think it actually gets a lot of at the local level. This stuff, this is happening to us. We're seeing water, we're seeing sunny day flooding, we're seeing saltwater intrusion threats, and so local officials don't really have the luxury of getting caught up in these kind of existential or kind of silly debates. Because just like a constituent would be calling to yell at an elected official if their garbage didn't get picked up, our citizens are expecting local government to address these problems, and if they don't, these elected officials are probably going to hear about it or even get tossed out of office. So they are on board with this, and we don't see this really tiresome and kind of distracting sideshow about causes and all the stuff that you see at the national and state levels across the country and even the globe. It's really solutions focused here.
Okay,
Henry, is there another question?
Yeah, there's a few more. We have two from Cammie Peterson about Nicole's presentation. So first, I'm wondering how they made the awarding groups, the White House, ICLEI, et cetera, fully aware of their work so that they were eligible to win those awards. And then the second one is, I'm also wondering whether there is one or more staffers whose full-time job is the coordination of the compact.
Can you hear me?
We can hear you, Nicole.
Okay. So Miami-Dade has been an ICLEI member for, since the early 1990s, as Steve mentioned, when we began our mitigation work. And so, the compact in general, we not only are we trying to educate our community, but we want everybody to know what we're doing, because we realize that a lot of our experience, as has been mentioned in the presentation today, can really be beneficial for others. So we have just made it a very conscientious effort to get the word out of what we're doing, and we've been assisted by ISC and ICLEI and some of the other agencies that we're working with. So I think that, and whenever we see an opportunity to apply for these various awards, we have also done that as well. So we really are making a conscious effort in that direction. And with regards to the second question, when the compact began, actually, I was the county's climate change coordinator, and that was my sole responsibility. And then when the Office of Sustainability was created and we began working on the sustainability plan, I was pulled in along with several other staff from various departments to be a team, an internal team that develops that plan. And so over time, my responsibilities expanded beyond just climate change, and then after change of administration and a lot of reorganization within the county as a result of that, I then was transitioned to the Office of Sustainability specifically, and then was selected as the manager or the chief of the office. So unfortunately, I don't have somebody that is taken over all of that responsibility for climate change. So I still am the primary person that is doing that, but pulling in technical staff from different departments and really trying to get them engaged in the work and the discussions. And I have a few key people in these other departments that are very instrumental in some of the modeling and stuff that Jennifer mentioned earlier that are very important to the work, but still at this time remain the primary coordinator for the county's climate work. In addition to...
This is Jennifer. I just wanted to note that the compact itself, when we were launching the initiative, it was all with existing resources, and it was at a time of severe budgetary reductions, and the support and all of the energy that went into the compact process was associated with existing staffing, and along the way we've been able to gain staff support through the services of ISC in some capacity, but the staffing itself has been with existing resources at the local level.
Yes, thank you, Jennifer.
Steve, this is Jason. I mean, I think it's also important that the Kresge Foundation grant that has supported an ISC staffer whose full-time work is to support the compact implementation. And Steve, you can, I'm sure, talk more about that.
Well, indeed, and so with Kresge funding, we were able to create a position in South Florida, which is a full-time one FTE that works is dedicated to compact support. So that's a staff member who works for the staff steering committee and coordinates many of the kind of activities associated with implementing the Regional Climate Action Plan, and that was a 3-year grant. Okay, Henry, another question?
Sure. We have one from, and apologies if I mispronounce your name, Dumatrita Mick. Looking back at the work that the compact did, what was the most difficult task to accomplish, and what was learned from that? Also, what are the most difficult things you anticipate looking at the coming goals for the compact?
This is Nicole. I'll just start by saying that I think really just the initial idea of the 4 counties collaborating was, I think, a challenging concept initially. As Jason mentioned, historically we were competing for resources, competing for grant dollars and federal dollars in the region. And so when this was first proposed, I think that we all weren't sure how far this was going to go. And I think, we all kind of walked on eggshells initially, but as Jennifer mentioned, and I think as I'm not sure if Steve mentioned, but the staff steering committee was specifically designed to be staff as opposed to elected officials, and that has been an important aspect of being able to kind of have these folks dedicated to just seeing progress get done and not allowing some of these other kind of political shenanigans to interfere with that, and really just focusing on the progress and the end result.
This is Jennifer, and follow-up to that, I would say, so it wasn't necessarily the most difficult thing, but I would say that our coming together initially was really driven by the issue and being committed to making the issue work or the effort. And with time, we began to develop stronger relationships that made a lot of the forward progress about, commitments to one another and wanting to be a neighbor's resource. And I think a lot of us today spend as much time thinking about how we're supporting the region as we do to our individual responsibilities. I think we feel a great deal of commitment overall to the individuals with whom we work. So that was a process that was in the making, and it didn't happen overnight. I'd also note that the formal adoption of the Regional Climate Action Plan by the county partners happened very quickly for some and took quite a bit longer for others. There was a lot of process that was involved, and being sensitive to individual processes and not trying to superimpose one's own expectations about how things should be done is a point of sensitivity that we've all tried to be aware of. So some of it has just been about process, learning, and relationships. I wouldn't say that there's been something that was, actually like a technical obstacle or a policy obstacle that had to be overcome.
And if I can maybe just pick up on this last part of the question, which was sort of what are our biggest challenges moving forward. And this is just my opinion. I don't know that we've made a decision as to what's going to be most difficult, but I would think that we're kind of at the point where we've engaged in a lot of this planning, and we're really looking at how we move to implement. And a lot of these the things that need to happen are infrastructure investments or changes to existing kind of long-standing codes or ordinances or policies, and that can be difficult in really bringing these the sort of higher level policies down to the nitty-gritty implementation level through other codes or ordinances. But of course, there's always the question of funding, particularly when it comes to infrastructure investments, and with the tightening of federal funds as well as limited state funds, and our own limitations as counties, of course, and competing with a lot of other demands. That to me is going to be a really interesting question moving forward. And so some of the work, for example, that Miami did with that Reinvest grant and looking at how public-private partnerships might play a role will be really interesting. Or maybe it's a question of needing to figure out how we take advantage of the investments that would be occurring anyway, the rebuilding of a road at a regular point. Well, rather than just doing it the same way it was done before, maybe changing it or making some modifications to the design or the construction where it now has additional climate resilience benefits. So figuring out what levers to move and so on to make all that happen, I think is really going to be the kind of challenge moving forward, at least as far as I see it.
Thank you. And in light of the time, I know we're almost 8 minutes past the hour. Henry, maybe one last question, if I could prevail upon my panelists to hang with us for just a moment more.
Okay. We've had multiple questions from the same people, so in the interest of just covering more people, I'm going to ask from someone new. There's another question I see about the not being able to talk about climate change or global warming. I'll skip that unless there's an objection from the panelists, since we've kind of already covered that. So I'll move to this question from Patricia Widener. Is the compact working on reducing greenhouse gases as well?
This is Jennifer.
This is Nicole, and yes, absolutely. I think that, as Steve mentioned, we really initially were focused individually on mitigation. And then when the compact formed, I think we were all just so anxious to make progress on adaptation planning that we really focused on that. But then if you look at the Regional Climate Action Plan, we do have strategies and goals with regards to greenhouse gas mitigation. And so we're looking at how we can further those. And we were thankfully able to get some funding for Go Solar, so we're working regionally on reducing the barriers and challenges for solar permitting, and really looking to see how we can better connect our regional transportation systems. One of the things that we've been able to accomplish with regards to that is we have individual county buses that are now crossing county lines and transporting folks from one county to the other, because we do have a lot of cross county boundary transportation on a daily basis, folks living in one county and working in the other. So we're looking for additional opportunities to better connect that. Jennifer, you want to talk about energy?
I was just going to say briefly, there's a number of communities in Miami-Dade that have moved forward with PACE in order to get renewable energy and energy efficiency better off the ground. Broward County, seeing the momentum there, also voted to move forward with property assessed clean energy. We're trying to address some other hiccups along the way, but nonetheless, we're still committed to that. Our county's also adopted a renewable energy goal for county operations. As part of our Climate Action Champions application, we focused a great deal of our priorities on electric vehicle charging infrastructure, how to better support a regional framework that can help our communities make that transition. Jason's been very active in looking at qualified energy conservation bonds as a regional tool for energy efficiency programs. So there's a lot of interest there, a lot of tools that are at hand, and I think still, though, much more that needs to be done. But we're looking to take advantage of all opportunities.
And if I could just add on to that, as well, as I mentioned, the region received this Climate Action Champions designation, which is focused on emissions reduction goals and programs, and so I think that is going to be a real catalyst for us to move that conversation and those actions forward. I think, in my opinion or my view, for the last couple of years, our focus has perhaps been a little bit more on the adaptation end of things, but as a result of just the sort of natural evolution as we continue to work together and as issues, certain things, we get more of a handle on them, and other things we realize we need to kind of pick up the pace, plus some of these external drivers like the Climate Action Champions program, as well as we'd already kind of decided, I think, that we were going to update our greenhouse gas emissions inventory. I think we're going to actually see a lot more activity in that area over the next couple of years, and hopefully a lot of it will be joint programs or coordinated programs.
Okay. Well, I'm grateful. Jason, Jennifer, Nicole, thank you so much for taking the time to share your expertise and experience with us through this SCLN webinar. As we noted, this will be made available, Henry, correct me, on the SCLN website for the HUD grantees, and the PowerPoint slides will be available as well.
Yes, that's right. Everyone should be getting an email.
All right.
Everyone should be getting an email right after this with a link to download the slides.
Wonderful. Okay. And thank you so much, everyone, for joining us. We really enjoyed the time. And thank you so much.
Thank you.
These issues are happening with greater frequency, and local governments are being called increasingly to respond to these issues. Just as we've seen an increase in local government attention to these issues, we've seen also a federal and parallel state increase in activities as well. And I think it's probably important and helpful to put this experience into a broader kind of policy context. I think certainly climate change adaptation policy in the United States really dates back to the early days of the Obama administration, in which many federal agencies began serious work in trying to think about what the federal role would be in addressing climate change adaptation nationwide. Early in the current administration, several of the agencies convened an interagency task force chaired by CEQ They made their final reports back to the President, their final recommendations in October of 2010. And you will see the policy goals and recommendations here really kind of stipulate that the federal role was going to be one of taking ownership of federal resources. So the feds would, in fact, take lead on assessing vulnerabilities and developing adaptation strategies for military installations, national forests, national parks, but otherwise work to provide decision support tools, science, technical assistance to the private sector and to state and local governments. But the recommendations here, I think, really call out the challenge in climate change adaptation. Because the impacts of climate change vary from location to location around the country, and because there is a need to coordinate federal, state, and local responses in a very seamless fashion, this really does create a very challenging perspective from the federal role. And then if the feds are in fact primarily charged with providing science, technical assistance, and tools to local governments and to state governments, you very rapidly run into a scaling problem. There's 50 states, there's over 3,000 counties in the United States, and there's more than 19,500 municipalities. So obviously, one-on-one engagement with every municipality is going to just not be possible for federal agencies seeking to provide decision support and other kinds of technical assistance. So perhaps there is some way in terms of finding efficiencies in aggregating local governments at perhaps a metro-regional scale that enables a more efficient engagement for federal and state actors, and particularly those trying to provide technical assistance, and really focusing on how to aggregate local government attention around these regions because they're facing similar impacts, firstly, and secondly, they need to often coordinate adaptation responses because municipalities often are adjoining in a larger metro area, and so the decisions taken by one municipality on adaptation can severely impact its neighbors if in fact it's not well coordinated. So we see increasingly activity within the local government context happening at various levels of scale. So we're seeing adaptation assessment and strategy development and implementation happening at the individual agency level, the Department of Public Works within a particular city. We're seeing cities who are thinking about adaptation in terms of how climate will impact their provision of municipal services. We're seeing most commonly individual jurisdictional plans, a plan for a given city or a given county. But now we're seeing, as in the case in South Florida, and we're seeing it in other places around the country as well, a desire to create these metro-regional collaboratives that enable an efficient access to federal and state technical assistance resources, an aggregation of effort, and a coordination of policy development and strategy implementation that we think is a new and perhaps necessary ingredient to really ensuring that adaptation is successful across the United States. So this brings us to the case of the Southeast Florida Regional Climate Change Compact. The compact itself is an interlocal agreement amongst 4 counties: Palm Beach, Broward, Miami-Dade, and Monroe. This is a geographically significant county within the state. It accounts for about a third of the state's population, as well as a third of the state's total economy, just within these 4 counties. There's 108 municipalities here, and there's a long history of work that had been taken by individual municipalities and counties prior to the formation of the regional compact. Miami-Dade County has had emission reductions plans in place and being implemented since the early 90s. And 3 of the 4 counties, in fact, had county-level climate change adaptation plans in place before the formation of the compact. So I understand that Nicole Hefty, who is our next presenter, is having technical difficulties, so I'll just jump in here quickly to perhaps cover a couple. I am Steve Adams. I'm with the Institute for Sustainable Communities, and it's our pleasure to host this webinar on the Southeast Florida Regional Climate Change Compact. This is a webinar for the Sustainable Communities Learning Network of HUD grantees, and we're delighted to welcome many participants from around the country and even some participants from Southeast Florida within the specific region here that we're talking of today to learn more about this interesting case. Joining me today are three distinguished panelists who have played a pivotal role in helping to form and advance the Regional Climate Change Compact in Southeast Florida. Joining me will be Nicole Hefty, who serves as the Sustainability Chief in Miami-Dade County, Jason Lepty, who is the Policy Coordinator for Broward County and for the broader compact, and Jennifer Jurado, who is the Director of the Division of Environmental Resources and Community Resilience for Broward County. My panelists in a moment will give you greater detail about the particulars of the Regional Climate Change Compact, but before I turn this over, I want very much to set just a bit of a context to help us really locate the compact within the broader field of practice. Certainly in the last several years, we have seen an increase in the interest in climate change adaptation at the local government level. It's really ticked up very significantly within the last 5 years, and I think this can be explained in large measure by the number of extreme weather events that we've seen that become increasingly common. Everything ranging from drought in the west to Superstorm Sandy in the east. Of her points while we get her back online. So early on in the process, I think it's important to recognize the fact that the region of Southeast Florida has many attributes that naturally tie them together. It's a linear strip with the Atlantic on the eastern border and the Everglades to the west. This is an area that does not have a lot of topography. There is a bit of a coastal ridge on which most of the urban area is built, north to south, but the underlying geology is one of porous lime rock, and the impact of sea level rise and the freshwater aquifers there on the landward side are things that are being experienced across the region. There is a very heavily integrated regional economy with a tourism and trade basis, and certainly the regional transportation network itself ensures that people travel frequently on a daily basis from one county to the next and going from home to work. So in finding commonalities across the region enabled this region, I think, to really fully recognize that they had common interests in working together. The Southeast Florida Regional Climate Compact, as noted, is really an interlocal agreement. It was initiated at a regional summit held by the four counties in late 2009. By early 2010, all four county commissions had in fact ratified the compact by ordinance or by resolution. And it had four specific commitments that the counties were making. Specifically, they indicated that they would